Hey guys, welcome to another episode of R-Rated Christianity. For those watching for the first time, thank you very much. This is an apologetics podcast. It comes from the Greek word apologia, to give an answer or defense for why we believe Christianity is logically consistent and doesn't violate the law of non-contradiction. For those that watch on a regular basis, thank you. We really appreciate your support. For newcomers, I know last week we had a really good show with Pastor Marquise, and Pastor Mo was in the audience, but he wasn't on the video portion of it. But man, we're gonna get him back on, because we had a wonderful discussion after, and he's thoughtful. He's a beautiful person and man of God, and so he's got a lot of opinions and discussions that we need to have him back on. And we're gonna be doing that more and more, bringing more pastors in, tackling tough topics. There wasn't a pastor that wanted to come on this topic, but that's okay. I mean, this is just, it's in the news. It's a current event. It's been an argument in the church for some time now, especially during COVID, even before COVID. And when you think about the whole issue of vaccines, it's religious in nature. It's cultish almost. I mean, on both sides, I guess you can argue. And for us, I guess we have to set the tone. Okay, when you ask that question of what would Jesus do, what does the Bible say about a topic, here on R-Rated Christianity, as you guys know by now, and we tackle theological issues, questions on theology, questions on current event, politics, everything. Nothing's off the table, because everything, as we're Christ followers, everything we do, and we're supposed to look at the world through the lens of a biblical understanding. And there are explicit passages, there are implicit passages. We're going to have to rely on some implicit ones to tackle this topic, because let's just, out of the gate, let's just say it. The Bible doesn't mention vaccines. It just doesn't. It doesn't mention a lot of stuff, and that's why we talk about explicit versus implicit. So there's a lot in the news today. I mean, these days, with Bobby Kennedy being the Health and Human Services Secretary, some of the statements he's made about autism and any correlation, and talking about trying to get down to the bottom of why the autism rates are horrific and they should worry us. 1 in 34 children are on the spectrum of autism now. I mean, it used to be 1 in 10,000 in George and I's time. And I'm 52 and you're 50. Oh, I was going to say 54. 56. And so it's changed. Something's changed. So what is it? Is it A, B, C, D, or is it all the above? And so, but one of the discussions that has to be on the table is, where does vaccines play a role? And what about, more importantly, where's the church's role in either advocating for or against taking vaccines? And so the Bible doesn't say it. Second CDC 5.6 is a bullshit deal. I mean, Masalo was just being his creative self and provocateur self. But so there's no scripture on it. And so we have to go principally based off things. And one of the principles that I think we as Christ followers that we have to be dedicated to is to pursue truth. Jesus says in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father but through me. John 8:31 says, if you're truly my disciple, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now he's talking about the truth of who he is, the truth about sin's control over you. I get all that, but it's still, it's a principle. One thing that Jesus cannot do, one of a number of things he can't do, is he can't lie. Right? He can't lie, he cannot murder, and he cannot be unjust. That's just for sure the trifecta of the things that God can't do, because all those things are antithetical to his character. So as Christians, as little Christ followers, we are to pursue truth. Number one, I like to call us truth scavengers. We should look for it, pursue truth, conform to the truth, and then advocate the truth. We should be advocates of it once we realize it, like doubting Thomas. Yes. He doubted. He was a skeptic. He wasn't a cynic. And then once he saw the resurrected Christ and realized it, then he conformed to it, and then he advocated it. But he had good questions. So being a skeptic, an open-minded skeptic. Well, yeah, they bust his balls about that. But I mean, Thomas is us, right? We're all Thomas in some form or fashion. Yeah. And so it's okay we should be open-minded. And notice I say open-minded skeptics with the focus on pursuing the truth, with the open-mindedness to conform to the truth, even if it touches a pet peeve of ours, and we all have our pet peeves. Yes. And then once we conform to that truth, if it's truly objective truth that is a characteristic of God, meaning that God advocates truth, yep, then we should advocate it and champion that truth. And this is no different than in vaccines. So truth is paramount. So what now? We have to figure out what the truth is. Another aspect, and I guess I'm just going to set the tone, and then if you have questions, put them in. Salo's monitoring the questions. Yes, he reads English, so don't worry, he can figure it out. And so you passed that class sometimes. But then another thing is 2 Corinthians 6:19 that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. Now we understand in 2 Corinthians 6 that's talking about sexual.
1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20.
First is it first or 2 Corinthians?
1 Corinthians 6.
George, don't whisper.
19 and 20.
Is it first or second?
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I thought it was second. I don't know why I'm thinking maybe 2 Corinthians. All right, maybe I got it backwards. Sorry, okay. but yeah, it is 1 Corinthians. I'm sorry, but our bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit, right? Yeah. So how do we treat that temple? And now I understand that in that passage, it was talking about Paul was talking about sexual defilement, but it's still a principle that if your body's a temple, then it's a temple. I mean, obviously, gluttony is something God doesn't want you to partake in because your body's a temple. It's about stewardship. So ultimately, in my humble opinion, from a biblical perspective, the vaccine issue and all medication issue, put chemotherapy in there, put radiation in there, put everything. I mean, put all medical interventions in there. And by the way, diet, everything else. Oh, sorry, Jeff. Did I do that? I was clearing my throat. We love our brother Jeff here, but I'm busting his balls whenever I can. I mean, we put everything in there. Put smoking in there. Put excessive drinking in there. Put whatever in there, right?
Yeah.
And if your body's a temple, it's a temple for every purpose. So and if I miss something, George, jump in and let's dive in and talk about what truth is and what should the church do, because we've had some pretty. Graham, what's Billy Graham's son's name?
Oh, Franklin.
Franklin.
Yes.
I mean, he said a statement that back during the COVID era.
Horrible.
I thought it was irresponsible for sure.
It was.
He said, and I like him. I support him. I think he's I just respect him. But what an irresponsible statement.
Sure.
To say that Jesus would have taken the vaccine. I mean, yeah, that's pretty serious.
Robert Jeffers, whom I respect as well, said the same thing locally. Not exactly like that. He said,
From Dallas,
he said
Robert
there was
Jeffers?
no compelling religious argument against vaccination.
Wow.
And I said, well, there's no compelling religious argument? Oh, I don't know. Maybe a forced intervention there may be an argument against forced interventions, right? Forced medical intervention, forced vaccination. I think I come up with a religious argument or two against a forced intervention.
Well, look, but George, we all have blind spots. And so, and maybe we have a blind spot. Yeah. So let's just dissect it. Let's jump in. Now, just to set the tone also. So Brother George here, if you haven't known before, I don't know how long you've been watching or not, his background, he's a chemist. You've worked for a number of pharmaceutical companies.
I am a chemist by training, academically, and spent quite a few years doing analytical chemistry, setting up both quality control and setting up experiments. Yes. I spent altogether, my goodness, it all runs together, about 6 to 7 years.
In the laboratory?
On the bench, yes.
What does that mean? Define that, because I know what it means.
A bench chemist. So anybody who's done any kind of quantitative analysis, knows what I'm talking about. You're literally preparing solutions, you're conducting experiments, you're mixing reagents, and you're reporting those results, and so forth.
And you worked on some pretty big medicines.
Well, I worked on the release of major medicines for Merck,
right?
Like pepsifimodidine, for instance. And did omeprazole analysis, which is the active ingredient.
Not Vioxx, though, right?
I'm sorry?
You didn't work on Vioxx?
No, I did not.
Good, all right.
But I was going to say...
You're in trouble.
And omeprazole, so active ingredients, things like Prilosec, et cetera. But anyway, the point is, I've done the analytical side, and then I left the bench chemistry, and I went into the supervisory side and spent a number of years in pharmaceutical manufacturing, where I'm dealing with the actual finished product, and then in a supervisory capacity, deploying that product worldwide. And then I moved from that into the research side, and that's where that's really where I stayed until I left pharma. So a total period of 16 years.
Got it.
And so on the clinical side, I was very much involved in clinical operations, and so I'm very, very familiar with clinical development. Very, very familiar with how to set up protocols, how to deploy them. The oversight of deployment of clinical product worldwide to various clinical sites where they are tested and administered to patients by either individual investigators or research teams. So I understand the process very, very well.
Yeah, you do.
And I've been alarmed since 2000 when my wife, as an RN, brought to my attention in pharma, which I resisted originally because I was a supervisor in vaccine sterile quality operations at the time.
Yeah.
That she had some concerns, and and Steph's not a chemist, she's not a clinician, but she's a nurse, and so she's on the back end, and so she and her brother was, of course, severely autistic. And so she just had a series of suspicions that she felt very convicted about. And so I took my wife very seriously, as every good husband
But
should.
even as a chemist, you didn't question your colleagues. At the time, you relied on what was being told to you.
I was skeptical of my wife's assertions. But,
did you believe at the time vaccines were safe and effective?
By that time, I had been married 7 years. And so I seen the degree to which her brother was afflicted. And it mesmerized me. It fascinated me.
Now your mother-in-law and Stephanie believes that Billy was vaccine
for many
injured.
years that it had there was some sort of correlative, at least correlative. They believe even more strongly that it was causative.
But back then, nobody would have listened.
And nobody did.
Yeah.
And they kind of, people thought, oh, whatever, and I dismissed it as well. And then just began to see things that were troubling. And I began to get into the literature, deep into the literature, and became very, very concerned with pharma's processes for constructing clinical studies in biologics or biologicals, which vaccines would be considered. And it's
vaccines are considered biologics. They're not considered medication, right?
That's correct. And they are. And anybody can research this. That a biological is abbreviated as an abbreviated clinical development process from animal tox studies to phase 1 all the way through post-marketing surveillance studies. So a series of 4 to 5 phases that can really constitute several years before you actually release a drug into the market, before it makes it through its NDA, its new drug application, and is released for
can we set the tone for people?
Prescriptive consumption.
And then we'll apply biblical principles to this. And because I didn't know before. I mean, I've been advocating with you for years, and we've been doing podcasts.
Well, allow me to capstone that, and then I'll punt to you. I just want to say on the issue of stewardship, because you started there. This whole thing that I've described is about stewardship.
Okay.
So, and you were in 1 Corinthians 6, and you said, well, this is kind of narrow, and but the principle is general. It starts off generally because he's writing to Corinth, and he's concerned about how they're not really being very good stewards with the message of the gospel of Christ.
Right.
And he's concerned that message is getting bastardized. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2, he said that it is required of stewards to be faithful with the trust that they've been entrusted with. That's a general principle.
Right.
If you're a steward of anything, you should be faithful.
It's a trust
to manage that trust effectively. And that's really what this is about. We have physical bodies, but they're more than physical bodies. They're actually dwellings of God's divine presence. So whatever you drag your body into, you drag God into it. So now that should raise the bar.
Well, so there's two issues here. For the adult, it's about stewarding your own health in your body. But then as a parent, you're stewarding your children's health.
Yes.
And so that makes it's even, I mean, if we believe Psalm 127:3, where the children are an inheritance, right? They're a gift from God. So if children are a gift to us, then how do we treat that gift? And so that's where another layer, and I think even a higher duty of stewardship comes in, because if you want to make a decision for yourself, that's one thing.
That's right.
But you're making decisions for a child, that's another thing. So I think when you talked about preclinical versus phase 4, I'm going to go quickly through this, because I don't think people understand the 4 phase studies that normal medicines go through. That if it's considered like a medicine versus a biologic is what you said. So preclinical is animal tox, right? So you've told me before, and I have notes I'm reading, 3 months to 3 years. So let's make sure animals aren't dying whatever this is. This is a normal. So you have preclinical animal tox, then phase 1 after 3 months to 3 years. I mean, I was shocked when I first heard that.
And so people may ask why there is such a diverse range, and that's because you may have situations where there are comparably released products, and therefore they're comparators. You can use some of that data. If the data is easily overlappable, you can use it, and therefore it abbreviates the process. I have no problem with that, as long as it's a 1-for-1.
Right.
And you're not saying, trust me, this is a comparator.
Right. And it's not really.
And I think,
So once you have preclinical, you have animal tox, 3 months to 3 years. You have the actual phase 1, which is after it doesn't kill animals on a regular basis. Then it's first in man. This is strictly safety oriented, what you told me. And that's another, on top of the 3 months to 3 years, this is 2 months to 1 year. So, okay, we know it's safe enough to put into humans. Now, this is all about safety, not about efficacy right now, just safety. So we have 2 months to a year of phase 1, first in man.
And traditionally, people would be locked down for this. This is safety, so you don't know what's going to happen. So they would have 24-hour surveillance by trained medical staff because they could have adverse reactions to it. And so it's expensive. They're very costly. They tend to be short, but very concentrated.
Okay.
And it can range, obviously.
Okay.
The range can be very small to much larger, but typically I gave you kind of an average.
2 months to a year. And then phase 2, now this is not just safety. So it's still safety. That's how concerned they are with safety. Yeah. It's still safety. Now it goes into efficacy. So phase 2 is a year, roughly. Yeah. Safety more. We're going to make sure it's safe, but then now is it effective? Does it do what it says it's going to do? That's phase 2. That's another year. So let's do the math on the high end. So on the high end, it's 3 years plus a year. That's 4 years. And then now phase 2, that's another year. That's 5 years of safety and of efficacy. Now you have phase 3, which I was shocked to hear. This is another 2 to 4 years.
And to be clear, there's safety never stops. There's always a safety watch, right? You're always looking for safety signals, but the primary concentration of phase 3 is efficacy.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So phase 3, now we've gone from first in man, safety and efficacy, phase 2. Phase 3 is pure efficacy. Now, they're not ignoring if there is something.
Of course not. Yeah.
But there's pure efficacy. Thousands of patients, you've told me. And that's 2 to 4 more years. So now we're already at, on a high side, 5 years. Now, this could be on a high side 9 years. I understand we can do the low side too, but it's definitely not 2 months, right? And so 2 to 4 years of does this do what it says it's going to do? Then phase 4 is post-marketing. Mm-hmm. Now let's follow these people for another 1 to 5 years to see exactly what are the long-term, well, not super long-term, but what are the after effects, so to speak.
And the reporting mechanisms for being able to retrieve that data from the field, to know whether in fact you may need to pull it.
We're looking at anywhere from a year and a half to 3.5 years. We're looking from 4 to 9 years plus. Mm-hmm. I mean, 4 is on the very, very low side, which it's probably somewhere in the middle to the high side. But that's where these are phase 4 studies.
And that's before you even get into, you include the animal tox phase.
Well, fair enough. I did not include that yet.
And then before that, which you and I haven't talked about, but as you're talking about, I'm kind of putting on my pharma hat. And I remind people, and this is a slight defense of the pharma industry in this regard, because I've spent a lot of time criticizing it. I mean, there's a lot of things I loved about it that I defend, but I'm a dogged critic of this particular aspect. But it occurs to me, Nico, that the preclinical phase, before you even start testing, they cast a wide net among active ingredients to see if an active ingredient is even worth putting through this entire process. And only 1 in 5,000 candidates ever makes it through, which is part of the reason why the damn thing is so expensive. The point is this: stewardship is at the heart of the ideal.
Okay, so you have different ingredients from some. I mean, they don't use thimerosal as much, but aluminum, metal. There's metals. There's formaldehyde. There's all kinds of dyes. Do they test these ingredients separately?
So those are called adjuvants.
Yeah, I know. Yes, thank you. They're adjuvants. But I'm saying, do they test these adjuvants separately? Then now you have to do it synergistically. Well, so you might have one adjuvant by itself that maybe is not a big deal. Then this one, it's not a big deal, but together it becomes a big deal.
Well, I think you're hinting at, or maybe not. It's not much of a hint, but you're bringing up a significant concern here. The ideal is, yes, you would look at the individual safety profile, the pharmacokinetic profile. How does this ingredient, this particular molecule, interact with the body, apart from its association, formulaic or otherwise, with something else? And so what you have started to use in your rhetoric, the synergistic effect, right. Because when you mix it with something else, indeed, do you physically alter the molecule? And if you alter the molecule in any way, you alter its reactive properties.
Right.
And so that's the concern. These are molecules, and you might alter a functional group, right? I mean, so these things should be analyzed individually. Now, to be fair, a lot of these things have been well known forever. And so how do we know that aluminum is a concern? How do we know that thimerosal, which is mercury-based, is a concern? How do we know any of this stuff? It's because, we have safety profiles on all these things for many years. And as standalone, clinically, they have serious concerns. They have serious toxicological properties. So it follows that just because you mix them a bunch of things, that tox profile isn't necessarily erased. You're wondering if it gets exacerbated. But the answer is that's the ideal. But the answer is, unfortunately, no.
But there's a
they
lot
haven't
of people
been thoroughly analyzed.
But there's a lot of church leaders, and so all this we went through, vaccines don't go through this safety.
Vaccines go through it at an expedited speed because this is the problem with preconceived notions. There's a preconceived notion the vaccines walk on water. That's the problem. And so a lot of vaccines, when you run a clinical trial, you compare your new drug against an inert solution.
Inert meaning?
An inert, it's unreactive.
Got it.
You know, kind of like on the periodic table of the elements, you have inert gases because they are unreactive. Their outer shells are filled with electrons, so they're not reactive. FYI, if you're in chemistry. So in this particular case, the description's similar. It's an inert material. So what's that material? Typically, it's an inert saline solution that matches the concentration of saline in the bloodstream. And so it's a clean canvas.
Right.
And against it, makes sense. You would compare a drug analyte. And so that's how it's supposed to work. The problem is that the overwhelming majority, and I'm actually having a tough time in memory. I have a lot of weaknesses, but memory is not one of them. And I honestly can't think of a single vaccine that didn't have as its placebo another vaccine.
I know why that's a problem, but explain to the audience, why is that a problem?
Well, it's a problem because obviously, you have another vaccine, which in my view, has not been properly tested. And so it's bringing its unvetted baggage, and we're calling it okay. And so obviously, whatever it is you're comparing against it, if it has the same issues or even worse, those safety concerns are going to be blunted because the backdrop isn't clean. It's soiled itself.
So you compare dirty sheets to other dirty sheets. It doesn't look as dirty.
So dirt doesn't look as bad.
Right. If you compare dirty sheets to clean sheets, you're like, shit, this is dirty, right? So
that's correct.
Got it. I mean, I had to translate for myself.
And that's the concern. You want to see a reason? I mean, there's examples all over the place, but I mean, Gardasil comes to mind. That was one that was particularly egregious.
So why then do you think so many Christian leaders have gone all in with the safe and effective? Because there's more church leaders than not have advocated for vaccines. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've researched it in the past, just trying to look overall. And is it a lack? Is it ignorance? Is it? I mean, because look, to go back before we get to that, just so people know, the Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund was started in the 1980s.
Yes, please say more about that.
As much as people love Reagan, and I thought he was a very good president, he screwed up on this shit. I mean, he did. I mean, he gave a pass.
This wasn't a high mark.
Yeah. This wasn't. I mean, kind of like Trump with his, Operation Warp Speed. I mean,
and that's coming from a devout Reagan fan.
I understand. Me too.
Exactly.
But we got to call balls and strikes. And as a Christian, we're truth seekers, and so we got to just call things out.
You bet.
So Reagan screwed up because he was convinced that the pharma company said, "Look, we're never going to get these vaccines out to market." And they were concerned about all kinds of illnesses and sicknesses and attacks from other countries. And so they expedited it, and then they got away with it by calling vaccines biologics versus medicine, right? Versus pharmaceutical. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. Versus a pharmaceutical. So that's why this expedited process. Then on top of that, the Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund, you can't sue a pharmaceutical company for vaccine injury. So the CDC set up a subdivision of the CDC called VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, where one of the things is, okay, you can't sue them. They're immune to lawsuits, so people can die, get injured, doesn't matter, tough shit, you can't sue them. But we want to track this then. So they have this VAERS branch of the CDC, but it's self-reporting, meaning that if you think you have a vaccine injured, however it's established, we'll talk about maybe, but then you get on this. I mean, people know this. I mean, Michael's vaccine injured. You know that. You believe, Stephanie believes, and your mother-in-law believe that Billy, your brother-in-law, is.
Yes.
And there's many, but we didn't call VAERS. We didn't know to call VAERS. We didn't even think about it.
That's correct.
We had so much on our mind. And the VAERS numbers are horrific.
They are.
I mean, you have close to $5 billion of vaccine injury money, which is it's the United States money, by the way, it's tax dollars, that have been paid out to families that are safe and effective.
And growing every day.
And growing. And that's only, but the problem was the Pilgrim Group out of Harvard in 2010 did that study. And here's the part that really should scare the crap out of people. Only 1%, 1 to 10% on the high side, but 1 to 10% report.
That's correct.
So if you look at the numbers, Saulo, and forget about COVID, we went through them every week on Sidebar back then. It's horrific.
It is.
Horrific.
Yep.
When you think about the people that were injured by Vioxx or any medication or pharmaceutical and how quick a medicine is pulled off market just on a handful of injuries. I mean, and the amount of injuries is, you have to ask the question, why? Why do vaccines get this special treatment?
And you got to, and for people
and then
who
how
are
does it
listening,
affect the church?
Yeah, exactly. But if you're listening, you're thinking, well, that was 1986. You know, maybe there's some hope. Maybe there's some hope that we're sort of going to be, you know, maybe getting rid of those liability protections. And the problem is that we doubled down on that. So we seem to be doubling down on that as a policy. We had, I don't know if you remember, but the first set of COVID rollouts was December 14th, 2020, I believe, because the Pfizer-BioNTech formula had been approved right before that, and they began mass deploying vaccinations on December 14th of 2020. That's officially sort of the beginning of the mass rollout. With it, or shortly thereafter, the PrEP Act came about. Do you remember that? The Public Readiness and Preparedness Act is really nice verbiage for liability from
injuries
for Pfizer and Moderna and any other mRNA provider. So it's basically the same as the 1986 Act, but tailored for COVID. You see, and so I mean, anybody who sits there and say, "What if you're so confident about your product? Why would you do that?" Now, I realize the problem with frivolous lawsuits, but there's a mechanism and a process to deal with frivolous lawsuits. Why in the world would you provide that kind of blanket immunity to, especially with an investigative new drug, an IND, a compassionate use investigational drug that had not yet been approved? So they deployed it en masse, but it had not yet been approved. And I'd like to know, what precedent is there for that? Well, so these are concerns. These are legit. You don't have to be a genius, or you have to have a PhD in clinical pharmacology to sit back and say, or epidemiology, and say, that doesn't seem right. That's all I'm saying is the church, to your point, ought to be leading the critical thinking. Ought to be, because we're concerned about human beings.
Well, you're talking about the medical side of it and the research side of it. And I'm talking from the law side. I don't know how every lawyer in this country is not concerned with this setup. So you have inadequate, I'm going to say it that way, that's my words, but I think I can support that, inadequate safety studies. When you think about that, you have a lot of injuries, because if you look at the VAERS numbers, and there's way more out there, and then you have immunity from responsibility. What lawyer should be okay with that system? That flies in the face of lawyers and what they do and how they try to get justice for their clients and accountability and responsibility. And if you're a civil lawyer, lawsuits, if you're a criminal lawyer, just fighting for justice and holding people accountable, whether you're a prosecutor or a defense attorney. I mean, so every lawyer should be just bothered by just that process. Forget about whether vaccines are safe or not. Just that system setup. That sucks, right? But now that we laid that groundwork. Sorry it took longer than we wanted to, guys. But I hope that helped a lot of people. I know there's comments. I can't see them, Saulo. Oh, you got them? Okay, so Deborah, we're going to really quick. Thank you guys for watching. Please share this. Make your comments. Saulo's watching, and we're going to trust him that he picks comments that we want to talk about. Do you think the older vaccines like polio were safer? Oh, great question. There's a lot of talk about the polio vaccine, when it was introduced, and when polio had reached its peak, and whether polio is still out there, but it's called something else. There's a wonderful discussion about this, and people higher up on the pay grade than myself, they can talk about that. But I know you can talk about, George, about when polio. Just I know you don't do anything in Cliff Note version, but can you do a Cliff Note version of the polio vaccine? Because I just want to get to all the questions if we can, and talk about the church. So can you talk about when the polio vaccine was introduced and when the actual decline of polio was, and we look at that in a reasonable way?
I think polio, whether you're looking at polio or measles, because it's not that much farther apart. It's only a difference of 10 to 20 years. The measles vaccine being introduced or developed in 1963 and deployed in 1964. You go back about 20 years or so. And you're doing the same analysis for polio. What analysis I'm talking about that pertains to this? And this is very, very important. Government records have confirmed, and I'm talking about the United States Department of Agriculture, the vital statistics reporting. It's what it's called. The government puts them out. You can go back to the time, and you can clearly see that the disease cycle was really sort of ending in every one of these cases, including for polio, including for measles. Right. So vaccines were developed and deployed at the tail end of the disease cycle, where the disease had been virtually eradicated, just in time to take credit for the eradication of the disease. This is consistently the issue. So I guess what I'm saying is, first of all, it wasn't necessary. It really wasn't, because that same analysis, excuse me, by the United States Department of Health concludes that it was really dramatic changes in hygiene, really, and sort of water treatment facilities and technology. Our first water treatment facility, believe it or not, was in New Jersey in 1908. And since 1908, I mean, can you believe I just said that about New Jersey? But from 1908 through the 40s and 50s and 60s, there were just incredible, substantial improvements that have been made. And so you had a lot of infectious diseases that were sort of being eradicated just because we didn't create an environment where those things could flourish. Mm-hmm. And so that's really the main thrust behind the eradicating of diseases, not these vaccines. In terms of the construction of the polio vaccine and measles, I think the concerns are the same. That's the problem. The concerns are that the testing, remember, this was an urgency. And so you really had a kind of rushed analysis. The patient populations that were tested were meager. They weren't substantial. And so the concerns that hold for measles hold for polio. And that's my worry. My worry is that you didn't have substantial enough patient populations. You had at-risk patient populations that were analyzed and insufficiently. And so the conclusions that were arrived at, I think, were insufficient to warrant a safety stamp. And yet it was rolled out en masse at the tail end of the disease cycle. And so this is why the word miracle is attached to it.
Right.
Vaccines are miraculous, products, when in fact, I think the history says otherwise. Right. So I have the same safety concerns about the construction of the media, the vaccine media, the adjuvants. And to be clear, the same adjuvants existed in the polio vaccine. And the adjuvants are there to intensify the body's immune response. Without those adjuvants, you wouldn't have as intense an immune response from the body. That is the purpose of aluminum, by the way. Aluminum enhances the body's immune response. That's why it's there. The problem is that there are serious and well-established toxicity safety signals with aluminum.
Well, I want to, Salo, we'll get some more questions too, but I want to get to the church. Why, I guess biblically,
oh boy. Yeah.
I mean, do we have clarity other than the fact that we should be truth seekers? Jesus is the truth. I mean, obviously God doesn't like deception. There's an argument on whether this is a deceptive move on the pushing of vaccines. I'm not saying people aren't innocently falling for it. And then you put fear in there, you put fear-based. And Jesus said how many times? I don't know if it's really 365 or not, but it's a ton of times where he just said, do not fear, fear not, don't be afraid. Because I think our intent, our natural flesh response is to be fearful. And we're very reactive. And fear is a good motivator, right? And so there's a lot of fear. Jesus knew that. That's why he told us so many times. And he's the Prince of Peace, so we're supposed to be at peace. Now, we're not arguing against all medicines. I mean, there's a place for certain medications. I think the concern is why this and I look for mens rea in cases, right? Mm-hmm. Motives to commit murder, motives to do this, motive for theft, motive for creating a situation where you're setting up a Ponzi scheme or a friendship and then you're screwing them out of money. So I look for motive. And what's the motive here? I mean, we know that the vaccine industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Truly.
We know that the pharmaceutical industry has the most lobbyists in Washington, D.C. by far, hands down. It's not even a second close in any industry, right? And then so you have to ask yourself, well, we know that even just during the COVID era, that in 10 months, and you don't have to trust me, trust CNN, Saulo watches CNN, that they reported this at the time. They reported this at the time that in the 10 months within the COVID rollout, that there were 9 for Saulo, 9 new billionaires with a B in the pharmaceutical industry. No mames. Yes. I mean, that's crazy. And why can't that be part of the discussion? I'm not saying that's the smoking gun, but it sure is something to consider. I mean, if you have somebody, insurance money claiming based off someone's death, that's a motive to want to kill them because they were the beneficiary of it. And so all I'm saying is it's got to be part of the equation. And when people shun you out and want to cancel you and ruin you and call you names, because it happened to me when I was DA, when I spoke out about our son's injury and what Davi and I believed about it. And so I know firsthand how vicious people can be and how inconsiderate and really how ignorant people can be by just not asking the right questions and not encouraging others to ask. But I want to get to the church after this question. I want to get to the church and what you believe the church is. Does it lean towards more support or against? I haven't asked you that question. And what biblical references can we rely on to guide us?
No, I think we've addressed the critical passages. And I mean, I suppose I would add Romans 14, 1-4. Because this falls on it really speaks to the notion of a person has a right to decide what they're going to put in their body, whether it's healthy or not.
Right.
That body belongs to them. They're the chief steward of that. And a medical intervention would be included in that analysis.
Now, that's for mandatory vaccines, though, right?
Well, we're talking about for any medical intervention,
right? But we're talking about people. Where should the church be in guiding
the church
congregants?
Should start from that position. You can't have an establishment that coerces people into putting stuff into their bodies. In particular, an establishment that then washes their hands of any responsibility. That's grotesque. And so the church should start from the position of, wait a minute, if we are in fact the temple of the Holy Spirit, if in fact we are exceptional, we're sacred to God, that is a really shitty way of being a steward. The church should start from that and see the inconsistency and should speak out about that.
Well, let me ask you this, like Mr. Hurry says, Charles says, are there good and bad vaccines? Because not all vaccines are equal. Whenever you advocate for quote unquote all of anything, you're pushing the bad with the good. So I'm assuming he's alluding to that there are good vaccines.
So here's the deal. I don't know how to really frame the answer to that question. So I'll say it the best way I know how. Vaccines work in the sense that vaccines initiate an initial immune response. So there's no question that initially you have an increase in antibody titers, and so that can induce a sort of temporary preparedness, if you will, immune response against the antigen, the invading body. The problem is that is grossly insufficient relative to any other drug, because that's your payoff. But as we saw in light of COVID, you had an initial response, and then you saw an almost immediate waning of efficacy.
Right.
I mean, it was dramatically quickly, and it began to be faster and faster over time, because that's where you actually get into immune escape and the idea that you now have a less effective vaccine. And so now you got to sit back and say, what's the long-term cost? Because everybody does that. What's the short-term gain, short-term cost, short-term or long-term gain, long-term cost? And that's my concern. There's a gaping hole on the back end. We just simply don't know. And the information that we do have is not good. Is really not good whatsoever. And we started seeing it within a year of that campaign starting in 2021. So in terms of good or bad, from the very beginning, I said, this is not good the way these vaccines are being deployed, because we don't have sufficient scrutiny clinically to be able to warrant mass vaccinations like this, number one. Number two, you and I talked about a lot about how we knew what COVID was doing. We knew what people it was killing. We knew that it was rather narrow in terms of the population of people that it was killing. It was people that were immunocompromised and largely people that were very old or very sick.
Right.
And so if you're
on average 4 comorbidities, right?
Indeed. And so if you're going to have a
deal.
quarantine process, you're going to refine and confine to that population. What do? They literally had a one-size-fits-all, which is unbelievably stupid and unbelievably damaging. And there's been study after study. The number one that I think about was launched in 2022 by Johns Hopkins that said that those lockdowns and those quarantine approaches were just absolutely destructive to the social fabric of the country, not to even get into the clinical side. And so that's bad. That's bad the way it was deployed. It's bad the way it was rolled out, because we haven't sufficiently counted the cost long term. The impact in terms of diseases like autoimmune diseases. Now we're seeing, and there's a pretty significant safety signal around myocardial infarction or myocarditis, inflammation of the heart tissue.
Yeah.
So that's indisputable now. That used to be a conspiracy. Now it's indisputable. And so, but we could see that early on. We could say we haven't documented for that. We haven't notated that. Those safety signals are showing up. The Pfizer 6-month report, they showed up in that report, but there was no response to accommodate that safety signal. So are there some vaccines that are better than others? Yeah, I'm sure there's some vaccines that are less destructive than others clinically. But I cannot think of a single vaccine that I would feel confident about that has gone through the proper scrutiny in clinical development. So now we're comparing, basically picking our poisons. That's the only way I know how to answer that question.
Well, and it actually made it into a case, right? Into case law that said that where the court deemed vaccines are unavoidably unsafe, right?
That's correct.
Is that true?
That's exactly right.
And then that's something that, I mean, the courts have recognized, or at least a court had recognized, and I think that's factually true.
But they come back and say, Nico, every drug carries its risks. See, that's how they excuse it.
Right.
Every drug carries its risks. Yeah.
So Veronica Gonzalez, hi, I'm vaccinated. I have vaccinated my kids up to this point. They're now 14 and 17. Is it okay to stop now? Or is it important to follow through with the full schedule, recommend vaccines, just trying to understand what's best stage? Well, Veronica, we're never going to tell you what to do. I've never told anyone to vaccinate or not vaccinate. I can tell you that George has 4 kids. None of them have been vaccinated, and his wife's an RN, and he gave his credentials at the beginning of this show. We have 2 children that were fully vaccinated per the schedule. Both of them were injured. Maya, just thank God, only on her skin, which she still deals with today, skin sensitivity, and you know that, George. But other than that, praise God, she's fine. Michael, of course, got injured at 16 months when the big MMR, we know it, we saw it. He declined rapidly.
Yes.
And so that, and then our last 2 children, Leah and Zyther, have 0 vaccines in them. And so we've become this unintentional study of vaxxed versus unvaxxed kids, and we can look at their head and look, this can be done. That's the part that's irritating, but there's no money in it. No one wants to spend the money to do a full study on vaxxed versus unvaxxed because the consequences could cut into somebody's profits. That's just the bottom line. That's just reality. Call it what it is. I deal with motivations, and money are strong motivations. It's either money, sex, or power, which is always the problem and always the motivation for a murder.
We're stuck in
money, sex, or power.
See, what you just said is immediately dismissed as conspiratorial because we're stuck in an echo chamber where everybody believes that the starting position is the vaccines walk on water. That's the problem. And so now the age of COVID has sort of poked big holes into that assumption. And as much as I despised mRNA vaccines, and they're not really vaccines, they're gene therapeutics.
Right.
But as much as I despise it, I think a lot of good came in the long run because people are having a more serious discussion about what actually goes into these products. And people are actually reading the vaccine inserts.
But what I think is fascinating, it's not fascinating, it's really kind of irritating because I've dealt with it so much. It's almost cultish. This is a religion in and of itself. So it's competing, it's kind of invaded and seeped into Christian religion. The Christian faith. People get, dismissive, condescending, disrespectful, vile. I can think of over and over. And instead of welcoming a conversation, it's a dismissive name calling, label you something, put in a corner. And I dealt with that at a high level back before it was even acceptable to question. I'm thankful. One of the many things that I'm not speaking for anybody else, that I'm thankful for as a truth scavenger and as someone who's walked in this path, this road with our son Michael, and all the challenges that come along with that. One of the only good things, I guess 2 good things about COVID craziness that we went through is, number 1, how dependent we are on foreign countries to supply us with things we need. That was just it's on full display. We can't accept that. And number 2, that we saw the negative consequence of not questioning quote unquote experts. And who are experts?
Yes.
From Fauci to all the other white coats that made you feel stupid as shit. You're not a doctor, and what does that mean? So you're not a lawyer, you can't have an opinion on the death penalty or any other legal issue? I mean, that's insane. We don't apply that to any other area that we live in. But when it comes to medicine, forget about it. If you're not a pharmacist or a doctor or religious. A George, I mean, and even if you are a doctor, a pharmacist, or a George, I mean, they say, well, you're not the right kind. And so you're a quack, right? Yeah. I mean, and it really, and anyone who fails to engage in the arena of ideas and bring this pesky thing called evidence, then I just don't respect you.
I've known a lot of PhDs, and I don't have a PhD. I have a bachelor's in chemistry from an American Chemical Society accredited school, and yes, that makes a big difference. But I actually worked in chemistry and I worked in industry, and there's a lot of people with PhDs in science who aren't worth piss because they've never actually applied it in a scientific environment. But look, I want to go back to what you said because
Can you not forget your thought? Because I want to say something about your background. Because when you get into a court of law, there's a Dauber hearing on experts, and it's Rule 702, federal and state, or they mimic the same. And the thing that qualifies someone as an expert is skill, knowledge, education, experience, and training. Any one of those things, insufficiency, can qualify someone as an expert. Yeah. And so I just want to affirm your point you made. Skill, knowledge, education, experience, and training. And so you really are pointing out a good point, that just because someone has some letters with capitals and lowercase letters, PhD behind, it doesn't necessarily mean they know what the hell they're talking about.
You and I have been in a few settings where the context was, we're talking journal to journal. People are asking questions about journals, and we actually get into the weeds at that level. Right. We actually look how the study was constructed.
Well, you get into the weeds. I prompt you.
But you've been there.
Yeah.
And I'm fully prepared to do that. And I think that's the kind of discussion that ultimately should be had. But I want to go back to what you said about the church.
Yeah.
Typically, I find myself at odds with people that I'm usually aligned with. There are times where we're having a scientific discussion in light of the scripture. And we always make the claim that the author of science and the author of the scripture are the same.
Yeah.
So science is simply a means by which we arrive at a truth. And we're preoccupied with the natural world. So science typically confines itself to analyses in the natural world, empirical science. I would say that there's a lot of weirdo, strange stuff that comes from Christianity that isn't scientifically based. And so I joined that camp. I would join the Robert Jefferson, the Franklin camp, in my skepticism. I'd roll my eyes because a lot of Christians, just frankly, are intellectually lazy. I mean, I'm sorry. It doesn't bring me joy to say that some of the most stupid people I've met are professing Christians. They're just lazy. And they apply scripture sloppily to negate science because it's just easier to do that rather than doing a little bit of homework. And I don't take joy from saying that. On this issue, the problem is that the science is sloppy. And the very people who usually I align with, who defend science, are the ones who are just taking something at face value and not counting the cost of what people might do to themselves by taking what they're saying at face value. And they haven't done the homework. They talk to their physician, they talk to somebody they trust, and they take that as gospel. Well, but something this serious,
don't you think,
they really
George,
need to delve in.
I think churches and church leaders, Proverbs says that wisdom is found in the counsel of many. And Jesus, the Lord tells us in James 1:5 that if any man lacks wisdom, ask, it'll be given abundantly, right? Mm-hmm. We're supposed to, Ephesians 4:15, speak the truth in love, do it. In 2 Timothy 1:17, mindset without timidity and fear. And so I think church leaders should encourage people like you that are knowledgeable and people that are advocates and get into a room and discuss it, because congregants are looking for advice. They're not looking for medical. They're looking for a way to figure things out. I think most people are fearful, like this young lady that's saying, what I keep doing, and they want to know what to do. And you have to make up your own mind. I have people in my family in their latter years that have been vaccinating every time the doctor suggests something, whatever medication, whatever this, they just go along to get along. They're staying trained, and then there's other people like myself that ask questions. And which one?
Well, if I can give an example.
Don't vaccinations have aborted baby? Oh, that's a question we've talked about before. George, you can answer that one. Because that's people in the church that don't support vaccines. They bring that up, and that's not in every vaccine.
No, it's not. It really isn't. There are fetal cell lines that go back to the 1970s, and so it happened. So what do you do? So if you in fact can use those cell lines And if in fact it can have some sort of curative property, why not use them? I mean, what's to be gained? The issue
You're not saying vaccines are that curative property. You're just saying in general.
Yeah, in general, right. So I don't think it's a great argument. So if I had a particular disease that could benefit from treatment with some sort of drug, and somewhere in the development of that drug and in the creation of its formulation, they included some sort of stem cell line or aborted fetal line, and I know that can help me in some way. Well, exactly what moral principle am I teaching that I shouldn't take it to heal myself? I mean, the error has been done. The damage. You're not saying
you're not encouraging to keep doing it. You're just saying if it's already been done.
Exactly. People.
It's like Romans 8:28, right? Where God can work all things out for the good of those who love Him.
If good can come from what was perhaps a horrific evil, because we don't know that we don't know the context of that abortion, and yes, there are contexts for abortion that I don't think are biblically problematic. And you and I have talked about, like, for instance, exceptions. Like in my case, if my wife was pregnant and she's ready to give birth, and the decision comes down to me, do I save my wife? And by the way, this is
very minute.
It really is. It's infinitesimally small. But if I have to pick, I'm going to pick my wife. She's the mother of other children. She's my bride. And so what I'm doing is I'm exchanging life for life.
You're choosing life.
And I don't mind standing before Jesus and having a total clear conscience. I'll sleep like a baby in that regard. So that's just an example. But my point is, good can come from that. I can't change what happened 50 years ago. A lot of these, by the way, this rarely happens now. If it does, it's mostly illegal because there's legislation in place to prevent this from happening. Yeah. Nico, if I may, who was the young lady or the lady that had asked the question? Because I want to tie this back to what you said about the church. The question about the polio vaccine. Because I want to use it I just want to use it as an exhibit. Okay, of how you can use, without knowing anything about science, how you can use just a basic logical inference, logical question to perhaps ask your physician or know that something's not quite right. If you go back to the polio question, and you and I chatted about this as we were talking. So Jonas Salk invented the vaccine, and we're going back about 10 years before the measles vaccine was distributed in 1964. So if you go back to 1955, when the vaccine was developed for polio, the standard for diagnosing whether in fact you have polio is that you were paralyzed for 24 hours. That's all it took. Yeah. After the vaccine was developed, the standard changed.
They changed they moved the goals. I think I took a shot recently.
I was going to say, what exactly is that?
I'm trying to speak Spanish. I'm speaking in tongues to Saulo. I'm sure there is.
So the standard changed. It was no longer. It no longer had to last 24 hours. Paralysis had to last for 60 days.
Right.
To qualify it as paralytic polio.
That's a big deal. 24 hours to 60 days.
24 hours to 60 days.
Yeah.
Now, here's the other dirty little secret. Most patients recovered in less than 60 days. So the vaccine is naturally going to seem like the solution.
Right.
Now, most people aren't aware of that. But that's important information.
Yeah, it is.
See, this is part of informed consent.
That's right.
It colors the background so that you can make an informed decision.
A lot of deception.
If somebody shares that with people, what do you think people are going to say? Are they going to be more inclined to take the polio vaccine? By the way, this is relevant. People are like, well, polio vaccine's been, polio's been completely dissolved from
eradicated.
Eradicated. And so now there's concerns about that because it means the media's pumping air into that balloon. Oh, even polio is going to come back. And believe it or not, there are some cases of polio worldwide, in places where you have serious hygiene problems.
But if you change the standard of diagnoses, and that makes a difference. So there are many people that argue that polio hasn't been eradicated; they just changed how you qualify it as polio. But I want to go ahead. I want to go to Sid's.
For people that don't know, because they've been intimidated, what are the rights of people in regards to rejecting?
So Saulo, before we get to the Sid's question by Vanessa, I think de la Torre, I believe it was.
Oh,
yeah. Okay, we'll get there in a second, Vanessa. But in Texas, you have a right to refuse vaccination. Now they talk in these public schools. Now private schools, because they don't take public money, they can have a vaccine requirement because you're not tying your public tax dollars to them receiving it. But in any public setting, just say, give me the consent form, the rejection, the waiver, thank you. And they'll say, oh, we don't carry that. You got to go to this website. They don't have them, of course. But it's just that simple. And you don't have to in hospitals. I mean, we're going to call CPS. Call them.
Rights to ask for ingredients of particular vaccine?
Now, you have a right as a human being to ask your doctor for what percentage of vaccines contain mercury or mRNA or both.
So the rights to ask what's in the vaccine.
It's not about a right. Of course, you have a right. You have a right to do anything before before you do anything. So you just say, "Can I see the insert?" Just ask for the insert. If people just ask for the insert,
I think that's right.
And then you just look at the ingredients and then look up each ingredient. And that's it. I mean, you can't even pronounce half the shit in there. So, I mean, just look at it and then say, okay, do I want this injected into my body? And then you got to make it, that's informed. Informed consent, Salo, means you are fully informed of good and bad, of everything. And then you consent to it. But if you're deceived consent is not consent.
That's right.
Or partial consent is not consent. Informed is fully being informed, and then make up your own mind. Because in the end, you're the one that has to deal with it. You're the one that has to look at your child. You're the one that has to deal with whatever you do to your body. That's it. I mean,
I just think a lot of moms don't know that.
They don't, Daddy. No, they don't.
Intimidated by the system.
Yeah. Do you want to answer Vanessa's question about the mercury or?
Well, I don't think she's asking a question there.
Yes, she did.
This one.
What percentage of vaccines contain mercury?
So here's the exact percentage. I don't know that there's a source that actually says the exact percentage across all vaccines. It's a significant portion, and even though the media reports that
mercury's out,
it's been. The problem is that they've simply lowered parts per billion concentration, and that's.
But aluminum's no better.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
The adjuvants are. I mean,
What's your poison?
Choose your poison, right?
No, that's right. I think there's the literature is just loaded with examples of aluminum's contribution to neurodegenerative problems by itself. And so the idea that this magically disappears when you put it in a formula with other analytes.
Does each vaccine have different? They have different adjuvants. So the thimerosal, which is mercury, you have formaldehyde in some of them.
Sure.
You have some red dyes. You have aluminum. And there's another metal that
unfortunately, there's human and in some cases bovine recombinant DNA and bovine serum, and so
what is bovine serum?
Well, I mean from calves.
Yeah.
And this is always a problem when you put any kind of tissue from animals. And put them in the formula.
And what for? Is that a medium to get the?
Yeah, it is.
It acts as a medium to try to spawn on your immune response.
100%. And so some viruses, some vaccines have the live virus, others are dead virus,
But why do people want to take this and not want anybody to sneeze on them? To me, it's less. When someone sneezes on you, you're being exposed to a virus, and then that's the wild virus,
this
right?
This really gets into how immunity is supposed to work.
Right.
And with all the talk about measles is actually perfect for this. It really is, because measles has an almost 100% attack rate. If you have never had measles in your life, and if it's the very first time, and you're around infected droplets, aerosolized droplets, because that's how it's passed on. You're going to get it. There's no question you're going to get it. And what's interesting to me is how aggressive it is. It lodges onto the mucus system and to your mucous membranes, and then it literally begins to work its way. And that's a good thing. It sort of incubates for 10 to 14 days, and it works its way through local and more distant immune centers. And it'll make you feel miserable.
Yeah, but the Brady Bunch didn't care about it.
The Brady Bunch didn't care.
Remember that, the Brady Bunch?
But that's right. But the point is that the percentage of people that actually subside to it are just infinitesimally small.
But now, Vanessa, so SIDS is sudden infant death syndrome. And when you look at the percentage in the United States of SIDS and how, and compared to even third world countries and other countries that aren't as sophisticated, quote unquote, as ours, it should shock you. Yeah. And if you look up, because I did one time when we first were getting into this world of advocacy, you look up, I don't know if you can look it up now, Salo, I don't know what they have now, but the CDC, the definition of SIDS. And back when I looked it up, what they defined SIDS as suffocation. I mean, you sleep with your baby, you roll over on your baby. That's not SIDS. That's not sudden infant death syndrome. That's suffocation because you didn't pay attention where your kid was. But I mean, they really don't have a definition of SIDS. Have you looked it up and can you check? Or George, do you know?
The definition of SIDS?
Yeah.
So please explain to me what's changed from the sudden.
I don't know. I'm asking. I haven't looked it up in a long time.
Yeah.
I'm just saying when I looked it up years ago, the definition encompassed and was majority, they talked about suffocation. And they described suffocation, sleeping with your baby in the, pillows and blankets and make sure you don't cover them. Well, that's not sudden infant death syndrome. There's a cause for that death.
Yeah. You're saying it was
a bullshit. It was a bullshit.
It this kind of umbrella catch-all
definition. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
you have it. SIDS includes sudden infant death syndrome, accidentally suffocation. There it is. The accidental suffocation, strangulation in the bed, and other deaths from unknown causes. Okay. I mean, I guess. Reproductive shares.
I guess because it died.
I mean, how do you protect yourself from that? I mean, strangulation, accidental suffocation. Includes and other deaths from unknown causes. Yes, so then if it's unknown cause, well then explore those unknown causes.
Like drowning.
Except but so it's an unknown cause except for a vaccine. And
it wasn't us.
Yeah.
It wasn't us.
Yeah. So I guess
I think that's the most important thing that you said important things, but that's the most important thing. There seems to be this kind of lack of intellectual curiosity, and the. I mean, I accept that from a structure, a biomedical structure that's replete with conflicts of interest. I expect that, but not from church leaders who ought to be leading.
Yeah, we can do a whole show on the conflicts of interest in the. Sean, hey Sean, I haven't talked to him in a while. He's a good dude. Will the education voucher change the vaccine mandate for private schools? Due to the public, I don't know. That's a good question. They're not finalized. They haven't finalized the bill. Once it passes, then they work in refining it, and they have to argue. I haven't talked to my brother about it, but I'll ask him, Sean. I don't know that answer. Look, I'm happy to share this. Sonia Villalobos. They push you into a room and give you a flyer, have you sign a form, and shoot up your kid. I'm an educated person, and I went along with them. Medicaid gives prizes to moms. So, yeah, fair enough. Look, I mean, Sonia, I was a lawyer, and I question experts for a living. I mean, when someone comes in and says my expert says this, I say, well, I call bullshit. Your expert probably sucks, and my expert says this. Well, my 2 experts say this. Well, your 2 experts suck. My 3 experts say this, and it's just back and forth. And so, I mean, not only even before I served as district attorney, I mean, I questioned the government for a living. I questioned experts. I questioned authority for a living. But when it came to vaccines, and I remember, and I say this, and it used to kill me. I've struggled with it, and I've toiled with this, and I had to contend with it. I mean, as a daddy, as a type A personality, a protector, a very genuine, intended steward of my children. I remember when we were going to first vaccinate, and you gently just asked, have you guys thought about the vaccine question? I said, well, yeah, Jordan, why wouldn't we? And in your background, and I was like, and in my mind, I'm just going to say it because I said, I know, George, you're smart. I know you used to be you're a chemist, but you're not an MD doctor. You don't have a PhD type shit. And you know what? And it is what it is. The Lord still uses it, and my wife and we're grateful for Michael. And he's, like I've said many times before, he's been our greatest teacher, and he's influenced not only Davi and I, our children. I believe I served in office differently because of Michael. I think I'm just a different human being because of him. And we're grateful for him. But are there challenges? Yeah, there's challenges. I'm not going to lie to you. A lot of sleepless nights, a lot of outbursts. She's in puberty now, and she's 14, and it's very challenging for a overload in sensory and a child on the spectrum going through puberty. Normal kids going through puberty is challenging. But I remember thinking that, and I remember thinking, come on, George. And I wish I heeded that, but then you change one thing and you change everything, right? So I just have to trust the process, and the Lord allowed it for a reason.
But
I had to toil with that for
dozens and dozens of discussions on this, because one discussion won't do it. I mean, in case people are listening and struggling with this, and maybe you're in a discussion with people, let me give you some resources.
Yeah,
there's 2 books in particular that everybody ought to have. One is written by Mary Holland, and it's called Vaccine Epidemic. And
she's a rock star.
A former NYU researcher, and she is an attorney by training, and she's just absolutely exceptional. And that book, everybody should have that book. It's well footnoted. It's a very reasonable.
Mary Holland, what is it?
Posited. It's called Vaccine Epidemic.
Epidemic.
The other one is by Richard Moskowitz, and it's called Vaccines: A Reappraisal. And he is a clinician and I believe a medical doctor by training, and he does a very able job in presenting the argument and going through the history and helping people understand what exactly is herd immunity. Because it was thrown around during the age of COVID, and herd immunity now today has been sort of co-opted by the pro-vax camp, when it's actually has nothing to do with vaccines.
That's right.
Herd immunity is an innate dynamic. You contract the wild type of the virus, and then you resolve it through the body's cellular and humoral immune mechanisms. It's naturally acquired immunity. And if you remember, during the age of COVID, there were studies that would be released that actually made the light of day that would show that natural immunity was performing much, much better against COVID. And of course, that didn't get much press. So there's those two books. And then earlier I was talking about how the United States Department of Health had released something called Vital Statistics. You can Google this and look this up. This is a long PDF, but you should download it, at least it's on your laptop or your computer. Vital statistics rates in the United States, 1940 to 1960. And I focus on that bracket because that's when you saw the polio vaccine, you saw the measles vaccine. And you can clearly see a number of infectious diseases. There's graph after graph that shows that, in fact, you had the end of a disease cycle right at the beginning of the introduction of key vaccines. Yeah. And then I don't know. I really I brought it up to make sure it was still out there, and it is. In pediatrics vaccine, this is put out by the Journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Pediatrics vaccine, there's a piece that I think does justice to this from December of 2000, volume 106. And it's called, what they did is they took the vital statistics from the government and they did a journal, and they summarized it. It's called the Annual Summary of Vital Statistics, Trends in the Health of Americans During the 20th Century. And the findings are sobering. And the conclusion is that between 1900 and 1998, almost 100 years, that the death rates from major infectious diseases decreased by something like 99.8%. And so you literally had a 90% of decrease in mortality rates from infectious disease. And the overwhelming majority of it happened before 1940. And you had vaccines for polio in the mid-50s and in measles in the mid-60s. And so I think you got to step back and say the argument that vaccines are so miraculous, that they're sort of beyond scrutiny, that just doesn't make sense. And you can dismiss it and say, well, I got more important things than getting vaccine arguments. But if you got a kid that's about to get a truckload of doses, because the early childhood schedule from the CDC
72
is pretty robust.
Yeah.
It's 72 across 16 years, but the overwhelming majority of those administered in the first 5. And so a lot of those are administered just in the first 3 years. I don't know. It behooves you to have a conversation with your physician. And if your physician is unwilling to have a serious conversation, find a new physician. This is too important.
Yeah, look,
it's just too
Sorry,
important.
I'm ignorant. What
not to
are
discuss.
some of the examples of ones up to 16 years old? Because I don't even have memories of getting shots at 15,
You can go to the
16.
CDC. Seriously, you can pull this up with one click. Go to the CDC and just look up the childhood vaccination schedule.
I guess I missed a few.
It's remember, Jeff, it's not 72 vaccines. It's 72 doses.
Yeah, it's
and so
doses.
you can have multiple doses. MMR is not all, for instance, measles, mumps, and rubella is not all administered in one sitting. And so it's spaced out. The problem is it's got a bunch of other vaccines at the same time. So while you're spacing out MMR, you also have other vaccines that are being administered at the same time. So it's a huge ass cocktail. And so I think it behooves having this conversation with your physician. And I think you're going to find that there are some physicians out there that spend time in the journals. But most physicians, unfortunately, are prescriptionists. They simply prescribe in accordance with standard care policies. And unfortunately,
and
I
then
think
they just,
do
and I don't say this to be disrespectful, but they parrot talking points from pharma.
They do.
I mean, just think of pharmaceutical reps that come in and they give them a bunch of samples And doctors come in and say, hey, try this. And yeah, they've done studies on it. Well, you're relying on studies that the farm rep told you that they said they did. I mean, you didn't look at this. Very few doctors look at the studies themselves. I mean, Dr. Suzanne Humphreys is excellent. Yep. And then there's another doctor, Larry, what's his last name? We talked about him last time.
Before the CDC became politicized, I want to share this because I, in case people think I'm just sort of pulling that out of my ass, this is the CDC pre-COVID. They have a journal called Emerging Infectious Diseases. And it's pretty impressive, really sound science. And yes, back in the dateless past, the CDC used to put out pieces like this. History of Drinking Water Treatment, a century of U.S. water chlorination and treatment, one of the 10 greatest public health achievements of the 20th century. And I don't even know if you can find it there anymore. If you need it, I'm happy to provide it through R-Rated and the link to it. You can clearly see where health organizations, 40 states, have adopted chlorination policies, and you can literally see the drop in infectious disease. You can see influenza pandemics drop. You've got introduction of penicillin antibiotic all the way down here in 1940. You have the Salk vaccine in 1955, the passage of the Vaccination Assistance Act here. And right in the middle here, you've got between 1960 and 1970, the introduction of the measles vaccine. So even the CDC has reported this dynamic, and I don't know why it doesn't get the light of day. And I say that rhetorically because, of course, I know. The reality is that the FDA, the CDC, a lot of their budgets come from pharma fees. That's a problem. That's a conflict of interest that needs to be addressed. Let's see if this HHS will address that.
Well, look, here's the thing. One more question, and we'll wrap up.
Real conversations, right?
Oh, Sarah, Brennan, good people here. I support and share these podcasts and receive positive feedback. However, tonight I recommend a response during the beginning of the podcast from a first-time listener that was not so flattering. I think you should have the opportunity to respond to this. Here it is. Cult shit, you and I are both vaccinated. So are my dogs. Okay.
It's great.
It's a great argument. Yeah. And our kids using big words to fool uneducated. I'm so disappointed. Well, be disappointed all you want. I mean, I don't know what to tell you because I don't know why it's cult shit. I think the argument, whoever this person is, thanks, Sarah, for sharing that. And please make sure they hear this part because I'm sure they've tuned out by now. What does it mean? Because Sarah and Ms. Brennan, I'm not sure how old you are, but I don't know how old this person is. But the vaccine schedule, and you can do a side-by-side of the vaccine schedule now versus the vaccine schedule in the early before 1980 and 1970s and things. I was born in 72. I was vaccinated when I was younger, but I had like 7 doses total, whatever it is. And the dog and the cats, please. I mean, that they lick their balls too. I mean, are you going to do like what dogs do? And your kids being vaccinated.
Thank you for the mental picture.
Well, I'm just saying it. I don't know how else to say it. If you're going to say cult shit, I'm going to say cult shit back to you. And these are not big words. These are scientific words. Since people argue, and I'm sure this person, this cult follower, argues follow the science. Well, George is talking. Let me finish, please. George is talking science. This is not George's opinion. And I've seen George, and I'm going to tell you this, and he'll welcome this, whoever this person is. I've seen him debate at restaurants, at coffee shops. Doctors, PhDs, MDs. That do not have the skill, knowledge, education, experience, and training that would qualify him as an expert in a court of law. And they can't refute the dissection and the strict analysis of the studies or lack thereof the studies. And when we go through the 4 phases and the animal tox and the preclinical studies and phases, this is just how any medicine or pharmaceutical makes it to market. So nothing about this was cultish. So I just think that's a very immature and I'm trying not to call names, but I just want to respond in kind. I think this is a very immature and very shallow critique because none of this has anything of substance.
That's not an argument. Where's the argument?
We're vaccinated. Okay. Our dogs and cats are vaccinated. That's a good one. Your kids are vaccinated. Praise God if they're not affected. I don't know how old they are, how many doses they have.
And thanks for insulting the audience. Appreciate that. Big words to fool the uneducated.
Yeah.
By the way, you're all dipshits. If you
no kidding.
No offense.
Yeah, except for this wise
offense,
guy.
so
I mean,
we have one genius, apparently.
the disappointment is backwards. I mean, but it's not. But it's not even a disappointment. This is the norm. This is my point. I'm so glad. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing this. So instead of refuting, I mean, you know what? That's like when I do my opening argument, and then I get some fucking wise guy come up there and says, whatever he said is bullshit. My cousin Vinny on steroids.
Great movie.
And it's like, it is a great movie. But I mean, that's your argument?
Yeah. I've not met too many cult leaders that allow for dissent. I just think I remember 15 minutes there was some, hey, Nico, do you think I should vaccinate? Hey, and you said, I think you need to do what you believe is right. I don't know too many cult leaders that allow for, dissent.
Free choice.
Somebody needs a new dictionary, really. Look up cult. Actually, what you're doing is you are operating in groupthink, and that is a distinct characteristic, actually, of most cults.
Yeah.
So, appreciate that. Thanks for Exhibit A.
Sarah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's so important because so many people, I welcome our dissent when it comes to my political views or my faith views, my Christian views. I welcome them.
So here's dissent.
Rabies vaccine is only 50% effective. It's good. That's a good job, Michael. You're hired. But
this is actually a trend that's true of most.
But I welcome it. My point is because I'm so confident in my positions, or at least I want to be challenged, and I want to challenge the person back. But when this is your response, and no disrespect to this dude, I'm assuming it's a dude, but this is the move. This is really the move. If you look across the board, it's name calling, it's marginalizing. There's that word. It's trying to put you in a box, and if they can label you something, well, then they just can dismiss you.
And that's why people get afraid to talk about it.
Well, yes, because of people like this, because of this cult believer and follower. I mean, I grew up in the military bases. When one of us kids would get measles, chickenpox, our Girl Scout troop, we can sleep over. Yeah. Yep, we would all bring our handmade raggy and dolls, and they called them chickenpox parties. This moved the virus through the base quickly. Then we heal and move on living. And then you have true immunity, by the way, Stacy. The thought was always the younger you went through the 7 years. If you hadn't had these, that's when it was considered abnormal. And look, there's actually an argument, and there's data, and George, you can speak to it, that if you've had the measles and chickenpox wild, that you have a less chance of getting disease when you get older.
No,
I mean, it's
absolutely true.
So because your immune system has been stimulated and it's at a heightened state. So, we know that the immune system is the key to health, and
exactly right.
80% of it's in your gut.
George, because you're talking about the measles, right? They're pushing the measles vaccine again.
Okay.
Could people know who owns the vaccines, or who the measles vaccine, or who's making money?
Repeat the question, because I don't know if people can hear.
I would say perhaps the number one distributor of MMR is Merck, MMR2. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say obvious because it's so predominantly used worldwide. So it is a cash cow. There's no question about it. And I think unfortunately, again, I think it's problematic. MMR, it's in its initial clinical studies work, the duration, the patient population was small, and the duration of the study was not months, it was actually weeks. So that's problematic to me. And the way it was constructed, it seems to me, was sloppy. These are drugs, I should say biologics, that again are not following robust protocols. That's a problem. They're not doing double-blind randomized. That's sort of the gold standard trials.
Phase 4.
Double-blind in a sense that both the investigator and the patients are blinded to what it is that they're getting, and they have randomized schedules that are system produced, so that there's no way you can interject bias or confounding. They call it confounding factors into the study, and I think they're just sloppily constructed. And so I'm hoping that with the new HHS and a new focus on actually doing robust science, that we can actually get back to employing that robustness to vaccine science.
The last show had Nico's wife and son. If you didn't see it, I think you would love it and feel so. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that was a one-off. It wasn't an R-rated show, but I think we put it on. I don't know if we put it on R-rated, but thank you. It was just to address Bobby's comments. Yep. Look, and there's understandable criticism on the way Bobby said. I know his heart and what he meant to say by it, but there's a discussion, and I just can't thank Sarah, Ms. Brennan, enough for sharing that. And I really hope that you ask that person that you know to come back and listen to our response, because they need to know how ridiculous they sound. And it's just, I want to know their worldview, and you can share it in the comments. What's their worldview that would allow them to react that way? Yeah. To calm, educated, factual. I mean, if anything we're saying is full of shit, call us out, please correct us. I'll quit learning the day I stand before the Lord. But this person obviously has arrived because they're not part of the cult, which they're part of. Yeah. I mean, so that's it. I mean, that's just, this is typical. It's not shocking at all.
Please write in or communicate with R-Rated if you think there's something that we have said that is factually untrue. Please share it. I think you'll be hard pressed to find that. But I mean, nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. But if you can think of anything, please write in and we'll address it. I promise you, we won't run away from it. I thought what you said was important because it is a huge distinction between vaccine immunity and naturally acquired immunity. The idea that vaccine immunity, we think of it in specific terms. A vaccine is for a specific disease, right. Or you contract or you resolve a wild type virus infection, i.e. measles, and so the body has a specific response to it and maintains a specific memory, so when that antigen shows up again, you're well protected. But what you brought up is a non-specific side to our natural immunity, and that is true. Whenever your body launches a response against an invading antigen, that it is a wide array of immune mechanisms throughout the body. A lot of those are non-specific. So that and the literature is replete. There's tons of epidemiological research showing that it's those non-specific mechanisms that confer some immunity when you face chronic diseases later in life. And a lot of them are cancers, I dare say. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And it's not a journal here and a journal there. It really is a significant body of literature. It's a huge plug for true naturally acquired and miserable. Okay, it'll make you miserable. I got it. And we live in an age where nobody wants to be miserable. I got that too. But the long-term payoff is fantastic. It really is. I mean, this is how the human body is meant to work. God designed it that way.
Yeah. And Sal, any more comments before we wrap up?
This one.
Okay.
You engage with this guy.
Okay.
Hold on.
Which guy?
Nikolai.
Oh, yeah. I
did,
did.
right?
Yeah.
And he commented. Right?
Again, I would chat with you another time, but I think Jesus will want us. Hey, Nikolai. Him and I started off rough in our comments to each other.
I saw it today.
And I think he called me a puto, and I actually laughed out loud because I love that word. But I mean, but I didn't take. I mean, I got thick skin. But you know what though? It turned. There was a turn, and I really appreciated him.
And I wanted George's comment on that one.
Yeah, let's read it together. So, and I think we are gonna. I hope we do chat and talk. I offered him a lunch, by the way, and man, brother, I hope you take me up on it. I mean that. Please message if you want to. Message R-Rated and privately with a number, and I'll text you my cell number. And then, I'd love to break bread with you and just listen. And I'm open to correction. I promise you that. Again, I will chat with you another time. But I think Jesus would want us to take care of our neighbors, and that is the argument. By the way, when you said what are the arguments,
yeah.
He's given the argument. You love your neighbor as yourself. And vaccines are necessary for healthy kids. To me, it's a no-brainer. And I respect that. Now, Nikolai, because I checked his Facebook, he has a son on the spectrum also. I'm curious to hear what happened, if he was born that way or what happened. And I'd love to talk to him. And he looks precious. And this dude, I can just tell, like we with Michael, he adores his boy. You can just, it's palpable. It tenderized my heart, because when he first called me that, I was typing out a Nico LaHood fleshy response. And then I looked at that and I said,
thank God for the backspace.
Well, then delete and delete and delete. And so I just said, okay, Lord.
It was more deletes, but yeah.
It was a lot of deletes, but still.
But check out Aaron. I wanted you to comment.
He's so sweet. I mean, the boys, Aaron Cordona, Nico, do some research about the term pharmaca and biblical connotations. Also, God made an amazing immune system. that doesn't need cancer-causing chemicals injected. I think that's a fair response. But what do you think about his comment, so you can respond to him?
Well, I agree with the first part, but it's a non sequitur. The idea that I love my neighbor and the notion that vaccines are necessary for me to love my neighbor is fallacious. I think there are serious questions that throw into question that what he's saying.
Yeah.
So what we've presented here are legitimate concerns that have been unsatisfactorily addressed. And if I care about my neighbor, I'm not just going to tell him to do it because I feel good about it or because everybody else is doing it. So I would disagree with that. I push back on that. And there's just an overwhelming amount of research to suggest, and listen to me carefully, that vaccines actually have very little effect on your child's ability to counter disease. There are just, I mean, it is an ocean of data over the last 30 to 40 years. Is it Nikolai? Mm-hmm. Listen, an ocean of data, and I really don't have the time, but I promise you, if you and I had another hour, it is overwhelming. I mentioned Vaccine Epidemic. That's actually a good source. Mary Holland gives you study after study after study, peer-reviewed research that shows example after example in places where the populations of young children are concentrated, predominantly in public schools across the country, indeed across the world, where those populations are literally vaccinated to the tune of 99%, and you've got a literally a breakout of measles, and you've got mumps, and you've got chicken pox, and they've all been vaccinated. Okay, this isn't a one-off. It happens over and over and over again. George. And so this idea that vaccines are going to protect them in some way, and they're going to be healthier that way, without taking into account the long-term we have raised here that aren't being addressed.
Well,
I
you really
think it makes your statement.
You
really
didn't know what I was going to say, and I mean, I know we need to wrap up, but this is such an important topic. And if there's look for any more comments, that's all you think we need to address. But here's what we have to contend with, and this is just an objective observation as a lawyer. I mean, just someone that looks at objective evidence. We have to contend with autism is 1 in 31, 1 in 20 in boys, 1 in 12 in California. What's in California that's different than other states? I don't know. It's pretty harsh. Some correlation, not causation. Got it. But then let's investigate, right? Mm-hmm. And the projections of autism alone, just autism alone, by 2050, I think it's like 1 in 3 or 1 in 2. It's horrific, because who's going to run this country? And so all I'm saying is, and it's not just autism spectrum disorder. When you look at our children, our kids are sick. We have sick kids. We don't have a healthy. I mean, everybody's on an EpiPen, has allergies, has sinuses, has eczema, has tics, has Tourette's, has whatever. I mean, we're just ADHD. Autism, autoimmune disease.
And we call it normal now.
Children cancers. Normal. All I'm saying is our youth are sick. And there have been people a lot smarter than me, like the George types, that will look at the injury, and they call 1989 the gateway year, because that's when, I mean, the Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund was passed, I think, in 1987, 86, whatever it was. 86. And so the farmers said, what? We're immune from this, and no advertisement, because every doctor's going to be pushing our shit. Boom. And that was the gateway of all of the start of all these childhood illnesses and that we deal with. And so when you look at that rise, and you look at the correlation of the vaccine schedule, even people that the Horwitz of the world, or what's his name, the one that doesn't want to debate Bobby
Peter Hotez.
Hotez, yeah, that guy. They'll even admit, that's correlation but not causation. Okay, but if there's a correlation between this suspect and that murder, even though we can't prove it yet, don't we investigate? And so I'm just saying, we all as a society have to contend with a sick youth. And a sick youth that even autism alone, we're not going to have a country to run eventually. If it truly is true, if it continues in this path, trajectory, Salo, and it becomes 1 in 3, or dare I say 1 in 2, eventually, I mean, 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 31 should scare the shit out of people. Who's going to run the country? And so all I'm saying is, I think Bob we owe it to our children. I mean, I'll just leave it at this, George. I know we can keep on talking, and I know there's another comment maybe to come. But we drop off our kids at this Christian summer camp. And I'm driving in, and every year it's the same. And I said, what and this is not a study, but I think it's indicative, and I think people will relate to this. You drive in and it's like, okay, go. Everybody's cheering, and are you guys really cheering? You really believe this? And so we're going right, and everybody's happy, and we're driving in, and I said, but why is this line so damn long? Where do I go? Do I get in this line? And the lady there, or the little the chaperone, no, that's for medications. That if your kid's not on medications, literally nobody in this line. So we just drove on in. The medication line, because you have to drop off the medications with the camp, because they have to make sure you take your meds. Brother, I'm not being hyperbolic. I can't stand that shit. I mean, the line was back. I mean, we stopped and thought that was the line we were supposed to be in, and then I had to ask, and they said, no, this is for medication. I couldn't see the sign because it said medications, but I couldn't see it. It was that long, so I went around this way, and we just drove in. But I think a lot of parents can relate to that. And all I'm saying is, when I was a kid, and I'm 52, that wasn't the case. St. Jude was out of a job because there wasn't childhood cancers. Now, is it just that? Is it these two stupid ass things? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it chemicals? Is it water? Is it stuff in our food? Is it GMOs? Is it pesticides? Is it all the other crap they spray on our foods and all the antibiotics they put in animals and chickens and beef and all this other bullshit? Sure, but we can't ignore the fact that this medical interventions, to the degree that they're at, and and everybody will admit that is honest, there's a correlation. Why can't we just ask questions?
Well, there are things that we
I don't get that.
Well, that's right, because of the inevitable conclusion. See, again, we've talked about this before, just psychologically. Human beings love the familiar. It's amazing the lengths that we go to preserve the familiar, because the unknown just strikes fear. We can't handle fear. We might be out of control. So I would rather put up with something that kicks my ass and actually hurts me every single day, maybe even my family, but at least it's familiar. So I will nurse my sin to a dark corner if that's what it takes for me to avoid the unfamiliar.
My.
It's sick, but we do it, and it's a human problem.
Yeah.
This isn't a partisan problem. It's not a church problem or non-church problem. It's a human condition. But there are facts that are out there. They're reported by legitimate organizations, and it's more than one. You've brought up SSRIs. This is an epidemic. I happen to believe it is. A significant percentage of our kids are on SSRI drugs. These are mood-altering drugs. We like our children sedated in America.
Let me tell you something, George.
Yeah,
In the justice system, I deal with it every day. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And this is antidepressants. It's Prozac. It's all this stuff. And if you look at the side effects, they're suicidal tendencies, they're violent behavior. And if you look at there's studies on mass shootings, and how many, you'll be surprised. Most of all of them, yes. Yeah. I wanted to be conservative, but most all of them.
It's going to be difficult at
there's
some
a history
point
of SSRI drugs.
To argue, it's got to be, somebody check me out on that, but the number of kids that are actually on some dosage of SSRI is significant. It's got I'm thinking it's at least perhaps even higher than 40%. Wow. It's a grotesque number. So when you see a line that long, I guess I'm not terribly surprised. I'm saddened by it, but it's indicative of our culture. We like a quick fix. We love shortcuts, and pharmaceuticals and drugs promise that. And when direct consumer advertising began in earnest in 1997, I think it was a huge problem, because it's like we want this stuff like it's candy. And the reality is there are serious clinical risks, and I think in many cases the biomedical complex is doing a terrible job informing us of those risks. We got to do better. That's all we're doing in the show. Yep. We care about human beings because God cares about human beings. Yeah. What you put into your body matters. And this is what 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20 is getting at.
Temple of the Holy Spirit.
That's right. What goes into your body, how you use your body, matters to God, because God is in your body. The Holy Spirit. It matters, for goodness sakes. And so
but that
that's
applies
what this is about. It's
to more than just
conversation.
medicines, right? I mean, from smoking,
how you use your body,
to drugs and recreational drugs, and also food and how you eat and all that other crap.
No, I was going to say that I understand what George was saying, that a lot of times it's because we're intellectually lazy. We don't do the research, one. But the other thing is the frustration about today. You keep saying right now during the show, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information out there. And there is. But then we were going to have this conversation, and we put this promo on TikTok, and then they delete it. Why do you think that is?
Maybe they knew what I was going to say. Maybe they knew that I was going to say that the International Journal of Risk and Safety in Medicine has concluded that indeed the number of global this is brand new. The number of global deaths, COVID deaths, has just skyrocketed among vaccinated populations. I mean, the numbers are significant, and so I don't know if they were going to say,
their paycheck
but you cut me off. You left it as a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
But that's what I was going to say.
Wow.
Because the CDC is saying vaccines are safe and effective, and then you have data that's being released every single day from peer-reviewed research, and I think there's a spirit of boldness now where people can say things now that they couldn't say before.
Look, man, I mean,
and these are concerns.
Look, I mean,
gotta talk about it.
I want to affirm Nikolai and the engagement and the respect.
Let's talk.
And let's just talk versus the other cult guy that responded to Mrs. Brennan.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the difference. I mean, because here's the deal. I never go into a conversation thinking I can't learn something. I mean, I just don't. I mean, there's things that like I always tell people, I'm great at what I'm great at, I'm good at what I'm good at, and I suck at what I suck at. And I know all three, and where I fit with everything. And so, I mean, even though it's something that I'm great at or that I'm knowledgeable of, it doesn't mean I know everything about it. And that humility is a biblical, is a Christian principle, right? Right? Galatians 5:22, the fruit of the Spirit. I mean, humility and patience and kindness and gentleness and self-control, not weakness. And so, and long suffering. And so we just have to have this mindset of let's talk. Let's know that our conversations could be a blessing to somebody else or to myself or both. So why wouldn't we want to sit down? Isaiah 1 says, let's sit down, and God is telling Israel, let's sit down and reason together. That's God. If God can mimic that for us and model that for us, we should sit down and reason together and follow the truth wherever it leads us. That is it.
You to a conversation.
I can't hear you.
Oh, God invites you to a conversation.
You're back on.
Yeah, He invites you to a conversation. We should invite people to conversations.
Yes, I mean, God wants to hear from us. He wants us to approach Him boldly. And we're studying in Hebrews. We're studying the high priest position is no longer needed, right? And then we can go straight into the Holy of Holies without the high priest. We can go boldly to our daddy, and we can ask for wisdom, James 1:5.
Well, the high priest position has been taken by Jesus.
Well, I mean, the earthly high priest position, exactly. But that's what Jesus is superior.
He's our high priest.
And so there's just this model of scavenging for truth, because that's God's character. He cannot lie. And so all I'm saying is we should follow the truth wherever it leads us. Mm-hmm. And it could lead us to some uncomfortable places. Look, at the beginning, I didn't want to admit it. I mean, I pushed back on you.
You did.
I didn't want to admit that maybe something that I did not research, and I toiled with that. Maybe I still contend with it. I'm not going to lie. I talk to the Lord about it often. But we are where we're at, and it doesn't change the truth, whatever the truth is, even if I don't like it. And so that's a spirit of humility that we should, if we're Christ followers, go into. So that's it. I hope this conversation blessed people, and we went way longer than we normally do, but I think it was needed, and we could continue to go. But any last questions? No, we're good. Hey guys, God bless you. Thank you for joining us, Nikolai. Thanks for joining in, brother. I really hope you message us, and I'll text you my number, and maybe we can break some bread together. And Miss Brennan, please show our response to your cult friend. Sorry, I couldn't help it. It's my flesh. Stop. Forgive me, baby Jesus.
And their cats and dogs. Don't forget
Yeah,
cats
yeah.
and
And
dogs.
the ball licking
Dogs.
dogs. Yeah. All right, guys. God bless you. All right, I'm human. God bless you guys. Bye-bye.